Maria Alvarez, Daniel Reed, and Lucas Grant, three lives destined to cross in Boston, would collide in a way no one could foresee, setting off a chain of jealousy, obsession, and deadly consequences that would shatter a quiet life forever. Maria Alvarez arrived in Boston during the early weeks of winter, when the city felt gray and distant. The cold surprised her, but she accepted it as part of the price for a better future. She had left behind a noisy home filled with relatives, heat, and familiar streets. In exchange, she now lived in a small rented room in a crowded building where no one asked questions and no one wanted to know her story. That suited her well. Maria worked as a housekeeper for several families in a quiet, expensive neighborhood. The houses were large, clean, and carefully guarded by security systems and routine police patrols. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise, packed her lunch, and took the bus across the city. She cleaned floors, washed dishes, folded clothes, and made sure nothing looked out of place. Her employers described her as reliable and invisible, which was exactly how she wanted to be seen. She had come to the United States legally, but life had not turned out the way she imagined. The job agency promised opportunity and comfort, yet her reality was long hours and little rest. Still, she never complained. Every dollar she earned mattered. Most of her money went back to her family in the Philippines, helping pay medical bills and school fees. Her own needs came last. She wore the same coats each winter and avoided spending on anything unnecessary. Maria kept her past private. There were reasons she preferred silence. Before leaving her home country, she had lived through years of emotional strain and broken trust. She learned early that attention could bring danger. In Boston, she made sure no one knew more than they needed to. She did not attend parties, avoided social media, and kept her phone use limited. Her free time was spent resting or watching television alone. The neighborhood where she worked felt safe, almost unreal. Streets were lined with old trees and clean sidewalks. Police cars passed often, and officers were familiar faces to residents. Maria felt comforted by their presence. To her, the badge represented order and protection. She believed that nothing truly bad could happen in a place watched so closely. She became familiar with the routines of the homes she cleaned. Trash days, grocery deliveries, maintenance schedules, and quiet hours all blended into a predictable rhythm. Predictability made her feel secure. She believed that if she followed rules and stayed unnoticed, her life would remain calm. But even in her quiet routine, small changes began to appear. She noticed people watching her longer than necessary. Some looks felt curious, others felt heavy. She dismissed these feelings as paranoia. Living alone in a foreign city could make anyone anxious. She reminded herself to stay focused and not imagine problems that did not exist. Maria trusted the system around her. She trusted the city, the rules, and the uniforms she saw every day. That trust allowed her to relax just enough to feel settled. For the first time in years, she believed she might finally be safe. She did not know that her invisibility was already fading. She did not know that someone had noticed her more closely than she realized. And she did not know that the life she worked so hard to keep quiet was about to be pulled into a storm she never saw coming. Maria's routine began to change in ways she could not fully explain. One of the homes she cleaned belonged to a police officer named Daniel Reed. The house was always neat, almost too orderly, and reflected the man who lived there. Daniel was known in the neighborhood as calm and dependable, someone neighbors trusted without question. Maria noticed how carefully he observed his surroundings, how his presence seemed to quiet a room even when he said nothing. Being in that house felt different from the others, more controlled, more watched. At first, their interactions were brief and professional. Maria arrived, completed her work, and left without lingering. Daniel noticed her discipline and how she avoided eye contact, how she kept her head down and focused on her tasks. To him, her silence stood out. In a world full of noise and attention seekers, Maria seemed almost unreal. Over time, his interest shifted from simple observation to quiet curiosity. Daniel began adjusting his schedule, so he was home more often when Maria worked. He paid attention to the details she left behind, the careful way she folded towels or aligned objects on shelves. He started learning her routine without her knowing. To him, this felt harmless, even protective. He believed he was simply keeping an eye on someone he trusted in his home. At the same time, Maria's path crossed with another officer, Lucas Grant. Lucas lived in a different part of the city, but owned a rental property that Maria cleaned once a week. Unlike Daniel, Lucas carried restless energy. He moved quickly, spoke sharply, and often looked like he was thinking several steps ahead. His reputation within the department was mixed. Some admired his ambition, while others quietly avoided him. Lucas noticed Maria immediately. Her accent, her quiet behavior, and her constant effort made her stand out. He began asking indirect questions through the property manager, learning her name, her schedule, and where she worked. What started as interest soon became fixation. Lucas liked control, and Maria represented something unknown he wanted to define. Maria sensed the difference between the two men without understanding the danger. Daniel made her feel secure, like a steady presence she could rely on. Lucas made her uneasy, though she could not say why. His attention felt sharper, more invasive. She tried to limit her exposure to him, arriving and leaving quickly, avoiding unnecessary contact. Unknowingly, Maria had stepped into a fragile situation. Both men were aware of each other, connected by their profession and mutual respect for the badge. What neither of them admitted was that jealousy had already begun to take root. Daniel assumed his role as protector gave him priority. Lucas believed nothing should be hidden from him, especially not something he wanted. Small changes became noticeable. Daniel began watching Maria more closely, convinced he was ensuring her safety. Lucas started monitoring Daniel's movements, reading between lines that did not exist. Each man believed he understood the situation better than the other. Maria remained unaware of how closely her life was being observed. She continued working, unaware that her quiet existence had become the focus of two conflicting worlds. She believed her discipline would keep her safe, that staying invisible was enough. But attention, once drawn, does not fade easily. By the end of that season, Maria's sense of safety had shifted into uncertainty. She could not name the reason, but she felt it in the way her stomach tightened during certain days. The city that once felt orderly now seemed unpredictable. And though she did nothing to invite trouble, trouble had already chosen her. The tension in Maria's life grew slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. Small incidents that once would have seemed ordinary now carried an undertone of unease. She noticed cars parked where they did not belong, shadows lingering longer than they should, and footsteps echoing in hallways when no one else was supposed to be there. Each time, she told herself she was imagining things, that a foreigner's anxiety made everything seem more intense than it really was. But deep down, she knew something had changed. Lucas Grant's interest in Maria had evolved into something more controlling. He no longer asked questions casually. He began tracking details of her daily routine, noting when she arrived and left, how she moved between houses, and even what she carried. He observed Daniel Reed's interactions with her, forming his own conclusions about the relationship he could not ignore. Jealousy gnawed at him, though he tried to disguise it behind the professionalism expected of his badge. Daniel, on the other hand, believed he was protecting Maria from the attention she did not ask for. His observations were careful and calculated, meant to appear accidental but rooted in intent. He would cross paths with her outside the houses she cleaned, timing his appearances so that she would feel a sense of safety without realizing he was always present. Daniel convinced himself that his presence was necessary, that if he did not intervene, Lucas might overstep in ways Maria could not handle. Maria began to feel the pressure without understanding its source. She sensed that someone was following her, even when she took different routes or adjusted her schedule. The uneasy feeling never left her, a constant tightening in her chest that made even simple tasks feel draining. She became more vigilant, checking over her shoulder more often and avoiding areas where unfamiliar people lingered. Yet she remained committed to her work, knowing that her income and her family's well-being depended on her focus. Lucas started taking risks to assert control over the situation. He would appear in places Maria had not expected, using his knowledge of the city and its routines to create encounters that felt coincidental but were anything but. He accessed restricted information through his position, carefully building a picture of Maria's life outside work. Each discovery fueled his belief that he had the right to intervene, that he needed to shape events before Daniel could influence them. The rivalry between the two officers escalated quietly, invisible to anyone outside their small circle. Lucas interpreted Daniel's care as possession, while Daniel read Lucas's curiosity as a threat. Neither considered the consequences for Maria, the person who had done nothing to invite either's attention. She was caught in the middle, her daily life increasingly influenced by forces she could not see and did not understand. Even her trusted routines became fragile. A missed bus, a delayed grocery delivery, or a lingering glance from a neighbor could trigger anxiety. Maria started avoiding certain streets and altered her cleaning schedule whenever she felt an unusual presence. She did not know that the men she trusted or feared were orchestrating their own narratives, using her movements to justify their obsessions. By this time, Maria's world had narrowed. She stopped socializing, canceled plans, and avoided moments of solitude outside her work. Her quiet existence was no longer entirely her own. Every step was shadowed by unseen eyes, and every choice weighed with hidden consequences. She understood only that something was wrong, though the scale of the danger remained invisible. The pressure was no longer abstract. It became a daily, inescapable reality. Lucas's jealousy and Daniel's protective obsession created a web around Maria, tightening with every day that passed. She had no idea how close the danger was, nor could she imagine the series of events that would soon erupt, pulling her into a conflict far beyond her control. Her life, once orderly and predictable, was now teetering on the edge of chaos. The tension that had built around Maria finally reached a breaking point, though no one saw it coming. Lucas Grant's obsession had turned into calculated planning. He no longer followed her merely out of curiosity. He intended to control the situation on his own terms. He spent weeks analyzing Daniel Reed's routines, memorizing schedules, and noting small inconsistencies. To him, Daniel's relationship with Maria was a violation of some invisible boundary, one that he believed he had the right to correct. Every action he took was precise, deliberate, and hidden under the authority of his badge. Meanwhile, Daniel remained unaware of the extent of Lucas's obsession. He believed he was the only one watching over Maria, unaware that the same attention he had dismissed as harmless was growing darker. His own behavior had changed without him fully realizing it. He appeared more often in her routines, offered small favors, and lingered just long enough to notice patterns in her day. His protective instincts, once subtle, were becoming controlling, yet he convinced himself it was all for her safety. The collision was inevitable. One night, a chain of events orchestrated by Lucas brought all three together. Lucas created a situation where Daniel would be drawn into the same location as Maria, exploiting his predictable habits. He used his access to building entry codes and surveillance systems to manipulate timing, ensuring that Maria would have no choice but to be present when both men arrived. It was a plan designed to provoke a confrontation, to force an outcome where he could assert dominance. Maria entered the building that evening unaware of what awaited her. She carried her cleaning supplies, her steps echoing quietly in the empty halls. The lights were dim, and the usual sounds of the neighborhood were muted under the weight of the night. She felt the faint thrill of anxiety, but could not place it, attributing it to her usual caution. Nothing in her routine prepared her for what was about to happen. Lucas was already there, waiting in the shadows with a controlled sense of purpose. He did not want chaos. He wanted to dictate every move, to ensure that Daniel and Maria were forced to confront his narrative. Daniel arrived moments later, calm but alert, assuming he was in time to protect Maria from any outside threat. The two men, each convinced of their moral high ground, faced each other without fully understanding the stakes. Maria realized too late that she was trapped. She tried to move, to leave, but the paths were blocked. Panic set in as she understood the magnitude of the situation. Neither man would step back, each blinded by pride, jealousy, or obsession. The air became heavy with tension, every second stretching unbearably long. Her heart raced as she tried to anticipate their next moves, aware that a single misstep could be fatal. In the confusion that followed, one wrong action escalated into irreversible consequences. A weapon was drawn, a shove occurred, and the controlled tension shattered into violence. Maria, caught in the middle, became an unintentional target. What was meant to be an assertion of control ended in tragedy, a moment so fast and shocking that no one could rewind it. By morning, the public version of the story had been crafted. It spoke of an accident, a misunderstanding, a fleeting moment of chaos that had no deeper cause. Lucas and Daniel maintained their positions, with explanations that made sense to anyone reading from the outside. Maria's presence was noted, but only as a footnote, her death framed as an unfortunate consequence rather than the result of obsessive planning and rivalry. The aftermath left a hollow space where her life had been. A quiet existence ended abruptly, the web of jealousy and obsession leaving scars that could never be repaired. Those who knew her briefly remembered her diligence and care, but the forces that destroyed her remained largely invisible. Her story was written in the silence between reports, in the details no one questioned, in the tragic proof that control and obsession, when left unchecked, could destroy an innocent life in an instant. The aftermath of that night left an emptiness that no one could fully explain. Maria Alvarez's life, once filled with careful routines and quiet determination, had ended abruptly, leaving a void in the home she cleaned and in the streets she had walked daily. Her death was officially recorded as an accident, a tragic outcome of unforeseen circumstances, but those who knew the small details of her life understood that it was far more than that. It was the result of jealousy, obsession, and power, all converging in a moment no one could undo. The city moved on as it always did. Neighbors returned to their routines, unaware of the full story behind the flashing police lights and the somber faces that had visited the crime scene. Daniel Reed went back to work, his presence still calm, his reputation intact. No one questioned his role, because nothing official suggested wrongdoing. Lucas Grant also continued his duties, praised quietly for his quick thinking and ability to handle the situation. In public records, the incident became a simple note, an unfortunate accident involving a civilian caught in circumstances beyond anyone's control. Yet beneath the surface, the truth lingered. Internal memos, lightly edited and filed away, hinted at discrepancies. A camera angle removed, a report delayed, a witness never interviewed. These small inconsistencies went unnoticed by the casual observer, but left a trail for anyone willing to look closer. They suggested that Maria's death was preventable, that her life had been influenced and ultimately destroyed by forces that should have protected her instead of harming her. Maria's family in the Philippines received the news in fragments, a phone call followed by a brief explanation that left more questions than answers. They mourned from thousands of miles away, unable to grasp the extent of the danger she had faced or the circumstances that had led to her death. Their grief was compounded by the fact that the city that had promised safety had ultimately failed her. Money she had sent, sacrifices she had made, and dreams she had held were now overshadowed by loss and unanswered questions. Over time, journalists and investigators tried to piece together what had happened, but without whistleblowers or detailed evidence, the story remained incomplete. Some details surfaced: a misplaced security tape, a pattern in work schedules, accounts from neighbors who noticed unusual behavior. But they were never enough to hold anyone accountable. Lucas and Daniel's positions as officers offered them protection, and the system quietly reinforced itself, leaving Maria's story as a tragic footnote rather than a cautionary tale fully told. Her death left ripples in the neighborhood. People remembered the quiet housekeeper who arrived every morning with her bag, who moved through their homes with precision and care. They recalled the shadow of tension that had seemed to linger in her presence, though they had never understood it. Some wondered if she had known more than she let on, if she had sensed the danger that eventually consumed her. But no one could have predicted how obsession and jealousy, when combined with authority, could destroy someone so carefully protected in appearance but entirely vulnerable in reality. Maria's story, though buried in official accounts, continued to exist in the fragments left behind. Her life had been small but meaningful, shaped by resilience, sacrifice, and quiet determination. In the end, it became a symbol of the hidden dangers that can arise when power and personal obsession intersect. While the city moved on, her story persisted in the memories of those who noticed the details, in the unanswered questions, and in the silent warning that sometimes the people meant to protect us are the very ones who can bring tragedy. Even years later, those who looked closely could see the outlines of her life in the shadows of the city streets, in the subtle shifts in neighborhood routines, and in the occasional quiet mention among colleagues and neighbors. Maria Alvarez had arrived in Boston seeking stability, safety, and a chance to build a better life. Instead, she became a casualty of forces far beyond her control, a reminder that even in a world governed by rules, justice does not always reach the innocent, and that some stories, no matter how tragic, remain hidden until someone finally chooses to tell them.